Before we dive into the classified archives of 1985 and the strange twist of fate that connects a rainy night in Vienna to a revelation 3 decades later, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The stories from the Cold War are fading, and your support helps us keep these historical records alive. The evening of November 14, 1985, was not a night designed for espionage. It was a night designed for staying indoors. A relentless, freezing rain had been battering Vienna since mid-afternoon, turning the cobblestone streets of the Innere Stadt into slick black mirrors that reflected the street lamps in distorted streaks of yellow and white. The wind coming off the Danube was biting, carrying the distinct chill of an early winter that promised to be brutal. In the midst of this deluge, a beige Peugeot 505 sedan was making its way slowly along the Ringstrasse. Behind the wheel was a man we will refer to as Elias Thorn. At the time, Thorn was 34 years old, officially listed as a mid-level cultural attaché at the United States Embassy in Vienna. His official duties involved coordinating art exchanges, organizing concerts for visiting American jazz quartets, and smoothing over minor diplomatic misunderstandings. But like many cultural attachés in Vienna during the mid-1980s, Thorn's real work began when the concerts ended. He was a case officer for the Central Intelligence Agency, operating out of the station's chaotic and overcrowded offices on Boltzmanngasse. Thorn had been in Vienna for 3 years. He was tired. The year 1985 had been a grinder for the intelligence community, the year of the spy, as the press would later call it, a year marked by high-profile defections and devastating betrayals on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Thorn was heading home to his apartment in the sleepy 19th district. He had just finished a long, fruitless meeting with a potential asset near the State Opera House, a meeting that had consisted of 2 hours of circular conversation and expensive coffee with a Hungarian bureaucrat who knew less than he claimed. Thorn was frustrated, cold, and ready for a drink. The heater in the Peugeot was rattling, struggling to combat the condensation fogging up the windshield. As he rounded the curve near the Stadtpark, his headlights cut through the driving rain and illuminated 2 figures standing on the curb. They were not at a bus stop. They were not near a taxi stand. They were simply standing there, 2 men in dark trench coats, one holding a briefcase shielding his head, the other gesturing hopelessly at the passing traffic. In the trade of intelligence, paranoia is a survival mechanism. You don't stop for strangers. You don't deviate from your route. You check your rearview mirror every 7 seconds. Thorn knew the rules, but Vienna in 1985 was also a city of protocols and unspoken courtesies, and there was something about the sheer misery of the 2 men that disarmed him. They looked like stranded businessmen, perhaps delegates from one of the endless trade conferences that took place in the city's hotels. Thorn slowed the car. He would later tell his debriefers that he didn't make a conscious tactical decision. It was a human reaction, a moment where the cultural attaché persona overrode the case officer training. He rolled down the passenger window a crack, letting the icy rain spit into the car. "Taxis aren't running in this weather," Thorn shouted over the wind. "You'll be waiting until morning." The taller of the 2 men stepped forward. He was soaking wet, his gray hair plastered to his forehead. He leaned down, peering into the warmth of the car. "We are trying to get to the Hotel Imperial," he said. His English was excellent, accented but precise, the kind of English learned in university lecture halls rather than from movies. "Our driver, he seems to have vanished." Thorn hesitated for a fraction of a second. The Hotel Imperial was on his way, barely 5 minutes down the ring. To leave them there felt cruel. To take them felt reckless. But the Cold War was often fought in these gray areas of calculated risks and social maneuvering. "Get in," Thorn said, unlocking the doors. "I'm going past it." The 2 men scrambled into the back seat, bringing with them a gust of cold air and the smell of wet wool and ozone. The doors slammed shut, sealing the 3 of them inside the small, warm capsule of the Peugeot. "You are a savior," the second man said. He was younger, stockier, with a face that seemed carved from granite. He was clutching a leather satchel tightly against his chest. "Truly, we thought we would freeze." Thorn put the car in gear and pulled back into traffic. He glanced in the rearview mirror, catching the eyes of the older man. "Nasty night for a walk," Thorn said, keeping his tone casual, the friendly American diplomat. Indeed, the older man replied, wiping rain from his face with a handkerchief. We are in town for the agricultural symposium. My colleague and I, we underestimated the Viennese weather. Agricultural symposium? Thorn asked. I thought that was next week. There was a pause, a silence that lasted perhaps only a second too long. Pre-conference meetings, the younger man said from the shadows of the back seat. Planning committees. Very dull. Thorn nodded, his eyes back on the road. Well, at least the coffee is good. At that moment, at 9:12 p.m. On a Thursday in November, Elias Thorn believed he was simply doing a good deed. He believed he was giving a lift to two unlucky trade delegates. He had no idea that he had just allowed two of the most dangerous men in Europe into his vehicle. He had no idea that the leather satchel on the younger man's lap did not contain agricultural reports, but something that the KGB had spent 5 years and millions of rubles trying to acquire. And he certainly had no idea that this 10-minute car ride would become the subject of a top-secret inquiry 30 years later. The drive from the Stadtpark to the Hotel Imperial is short, but in the heavy traffic of a storm, time stretches. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth, a hypnotic metronome counting down the seconds. Inside the car, the air grew heavy with the humidity of drying clothes. Thorn was a trained observer. It was impossible for him to turn off the part of his brain that catalogued details. As he navigated the slick streets, he listened to the men in the back. They were quiet at first, catching their breath. Then, they began to speak to each other in low tones. They spoke English. This was the first detail that Thorn would later fixate on. Why English? If they were foreign delegates, German, French, perhaps Scandinavian given their accents, why speak English to each other when they thought the American driver was focused on the road? Unless English was their common language, or unless they were maintaining cover even in a private moment. We need to call the secretariat when we arrive, the older man said. Let them know we are delayed. The lines will be busy, the younger man replied. His voice was deeper, rougher. We should just go to the room, dry off. No, we call. Protocol, Alexei. The older man had slipped. He had used a name, Alexei. It was a common name, certainly, but it anchored them. Thorn glanced in the mirror again. The streetlights from the opera house illuminated the back seat for a brief moment. He saw the older man's watch. It was a heavy silver timepiece, worn on the inside of the wrist, military style. So, where are you gentlemen from? Thorn asked, feigning polite disinterest. You have the look of Northern Europe. Finland, the older man lied smoothly. Helsinki. We are used to the cold, but the rain is different here. Finland, Thorn repeated. Lovely country. I spent a week in Helsinki back in '82. Do you know the ravaged statue near the harbor? Of course, the older man said. It is beautiful in the summer. Thorn tightened his grip on the steering wheel. There was no ravaged statue near the harbor in Helsinki. He had made it up. A standard verify bait maneuver. A local would have looked confused or corrected him. The Finnish delegate had agreed simply to keep the conversation moving, to avoid conflict. They are lying, Thorn thought. The realization didn't bring fear, but a sudden, sharp clarity. The fatigue of his day evaporated. He was now active. He didn't let on. Yeah, beautiful, Thorn said. So agriculture, grain, machinery. Machinery, the younger man, Alexei, said quickly. Tractors, harvesters, the mechanics of the harvest. The mechanics of the harvest, Thorn mused. It was an odd phrase, poetic almost, but unnatural. It sounded like a phrase translated directly from another language, untangling itself awkwardly in English syntax. Mechanika urozhaya. It sounded Russian in structure. Thorn's mind began to race. Who were they? East Germans? Poles? Soviets? If they were Eastern Bloc, they shouldn't be wandering around Vienna alone at night. The Soviet delegation kept their people on short leashes, group transport, monitored hotels, curfews. For two of them to be stranded, alone, meant they were either very high up or they were operating off the books. And then there was the smell. Beneath the wet wool, Thorn caught a whiff of tobacco. It wasn't the sweet blonde tobacco of American cigarettes, nor the harsh acrid smell of the French Gauloises. It was distinct, a heavy, almost cardboard-like scent. Paparosa, the tube cigarettes favored in the Soviet Union. Thorne checked the mirror again. The younger man was clutching the satchel with white-knuckled intensity. He wasn't just holding it, he was guarding it. His hand was positioned near the clasp, ready to open it or prevent it from being taken. "You must see a lot of interesting things in your line of work," Thorne said, testing the waters. "Diplomacy, I mean. Traveling the world." "It is mostly paperwork," the older man said, his voice tight. "And waiting. Much waiting." "I bet. Just like tonight." The car came to a halt at a red light. The silence returned, thicker than before. Thorne sensed the tension radiating from the back seat. These men were coiled springs. They weren't just cold, they were terrified. Or they were hunting. Thorne considered his options. He had a weapon in the glove box, a standard-issue snub-nosed revolver, but reaching for it would escalate a situation that was currently just a car ride. He could drive them to the police station? No, that would cause a diplomatic incident if he was wrong. He could drive them to the embassy? Impossible. He had to stick to the script. He was just a helpful cultural attaché. "Almost there," Thorne said cheerfully. "The Imperial is just 2 blocks up. I'll drop you at the side entrance. Keeps you out of the wind." "The side entrance is fine," the older man said. "Thank you." As the light turned green, Thorne noticed something else. The younger man, Alexei, was looking out the back window, not at the sights, but scanning the cars behind them. He was checking for a tail. His head moved with the precise, rhythmic sweep of a surveillance detection route. Thorne realized with a jolt that he wasn't just giving a ride to liars, he was giving a ride to professionals. And in Vienna in 1985, professionals didn't get stranded in the rain unless something had gone very, very wrong. The Hotel Imperial was a grand, imposing structure, a remnant of the Austro-Hungarian Empire that loomed over the Ringstrasse like a fortress of luxury. It was the preferred haunt of visiting dignitaries, high-ranking spies, and arms dealers who wanted to be seen. Thorne pulled the Peugeot up to the curb near the side entrance on Kärntner Ring. The area was slightly more sheltered, away from the main bustle of the doormen and the valets. The rain was still falling in sheets, blurring the world outside into an impressionist painting of gray and gold. "Here we are," Thorne said, putting the car in park, but keeping the engine running. "Warm and dry." The older man exhaled, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the entire evening. "You have been very kind," he said. He reached into his coat pocket. For a split second, Thorne's muscles tensed, his eyes flicking to the glove box. But the man simply pulled out a pack of cigarettes, a generic, unmarked silver pack. "Please," the man said, offering one to Thorne. "For your trouble." "I don't smoke," Thorne said, smiling. "But thank you. Good luck with the mechanics of the harvest." The older man paused. His eyes met Thorne's in the rearview mirror. It was a long, searching look, a look of assessment. For a moment, the mask slipped. There was no Finnish delegate in those eyes. There was only a cold, hard intelligence. The man knew that Thorne knew, and Thorne knew that he knew. It was a perfect moment of mutual, silent recognition, the kind that happens between 2 predators who pass each other in the jungle and decide not to fight. "Goodbye," the man said softly. They opened the doors. The cold wind rushed back in. The younger man, Alexei, scrambled out first, shielding the satchel with his body as if it contained a newborn baby. He looked left, then right, scanning the street with intense focus. He didn't look back at the car. He didn't say thank you. He just moved, heading not toward the hotel entrance, but toward the alleyway that ran alongside it. The older man followed, stepping out into the rain. He closed the door firmly. Thorne watched them through the passenger window. They didn't go into the Hotel Imperial. They walked briskly past the entrance, heads down, and turned sharply into the narrow street of Bösendorfer Strasse. They were moving with purpose, moving away from the light, vanishing into the shadows of the city. Thorne sat there for a moment, the engine idling. The adrenaline was pumping through his system now. He should follow them. He should call the station. He should report that 2 unidentified Eastern Bloc operatives were moving on foot near the Imperial with a package they were desperate to protect. But he didn't move. He was a cultural attaché in a beige Peugeot. Following them on foot would be suicide. Following in the car would be obvious. And he had nothing, no names, no crime. Just a bad feeling and a lie about a statue in Helsinki. He put the car in gear and pulled away, merging back into the traffic. As he drove, he replayed the conversation in his head. Finland, machinery, the watch, the smell. He reached for the radio, turning the dial until he found the BBC World Service. The news was filled with reports of the upcoming summit in Geneva between Reagan and Gorbachev. The world was holding its breath, hoping for a thaw in the icy relations between the superpowers. Geneva. Thorne muttered to himself. Everyone is looking at Geneva. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something important, something that was slipping through the cracks while the world looked the other way. He had touched the live wire of the Cold War, felt its hum for 10 minutes, and now he was driving home to a cold apartment and a frozen dinner. When he got home, Thorne sat at his kitchen table and wrote down everything he could remember. He described their faces, their height, the color of their coats. He drew a sketch of the older man's watch. He wrote down the phrase, "Mechanics of the Harvest." He noted the drop-off point and the direction they walked. He filed the report the next morning at the embassy. It was typed on a standard contact report form, classified confidential. He handed it to the station chief, a gruff man named Holloway. Holloway glanced at it, scanning the text. "Two hitchhikers, Elias? Really? They were professionals, Chief. I'm sure of it. Soviet bloc. Maybe illegally deployed. Did they threaten you? No. Did they say anything compromising? No. They lied about being Finnish." Holloway sighed, tossing the report into a wire basket overflowing with similar paperwork. "Vienna is full of liars, Elias. It's the primary export. Unless they left a bag of plutonium in your back seat, this is just noise. We have real problems. The Geneva prep is a nightmare. Focus on your Hungarian contact." Thorne nodded, defeated. "Yes, sir." The report, labeled Incident 85 Nav 14T, was filed away in the vast, cavernous archives of the CIA's Vienna station. It was buried under mountains of analysis, cable traffic, and urgent memos. It was forgotten. Thorne went back to his work. The rain stopped. The winter came. The summit in Geneva happened. The world turned. And the two men in the rain became just another anecdote, a story Thorne would tell at retirement parties after a few drinks. The time he played taxi driver to the enemy. He didn't know that the report would sit in the darkness for 30 years, waiting for the light. The years that followed 1985 were a blur of geopolitical acceleration. For Elias Thorne, the profession of intelligence gathering changed from a slow game of chess to a chaotic game of hungry hippos. In 1986, the Chernobyl disaster shook the foundations of the Soviet Union. Thorne was in Berlin then, monitoring the fallout, both radioactive and political. The rigid structures of the East were beginning to crack. The assets he handled became more desperate, their information more fragmented. In 1989, the impossible happened. The Berlin Wall fell. Thorne was there, standing near Checkpoint Charlie, watching the crowds surge over the concrete barriers. He saw tears, champagne, and the sheer overwhelming force of history being made. It was the end of the world as he knew it, and the beginning of something messy and undefined. Through it all, the memory of the two men in Vienna faded. It became a ghost file in Thorne's mind, an unresolved chord in a symphony that had otherwise ended. Every case officer has them. The face in the crowd you recognized but couldn't place. The phone number found in a dead man's pocket that never rang. The car ride in the rain. Thorne climbed the ranks. He moved from Vienna to Berlin, then to Langley, then a stint in London. He became a specialist in counter-proliferation, chasing loose nukes and chemical weapons in the wreckage of the USSR. He married, divorced, and married again. He got gray hair. He started wearing reading glasses. By the mid-1990s, the CIA was undergoing a massive identity crisis. The enemy was gone. The budget was slashed. The old files from the Cold War were being boxed up and sent to long-term storage facilities in the Virginia suburbs. One afternoon in 1996, Thorne was working in the archives at Langley, looking for background on a former Stasi officer who had surfaced in the arms trade. He found himself wandering through the rows of boxes marked Vienna Station 1980-1990. On a whim, he pulled a box from 1985. He flipped through the yellowing paper, the smell of old dust and mimeograph ink filling his nose. He was looking for his old contact reports. He wanted to see if his writing had improved over the years. He didn't find the report about the hitchhikers. It was missing. He checked the logbook. The file incident, 85 Nov 14T, was listed, but the status column was marked with a stamp. Transfer, Directorate of Operations, Special Projects. Thorne frowned. Special projects? That was the black hole. That was where files went when they were too sensitive for the general population, or when they were part of an operation that never officially existed. Why would a routine contact report about 2 hitchhikers be transferred to special projects? He asked the archivist, a woman named Sarah who had been there since the Nixon administration. If it went to special projects in the 80s, she said, peering over her glasses. It's gone, Elias. Burned or buried. Or it was part of something that's still active. Still active? Thorne laughed. It was 1985. The country doesn't even exist anymore. Secrets don't have expiration dates, she said. Only people do. Thorne let it go. He had a job to do. He put the box back and walked away. But the seed was planted. The mystery had deepened. It wasn't just a random encounter anymore. It was an anomaly. And in the world of intelligence, anomalies are dangerous. He retired in 2010. A quiet ceremony, a medal, a plaque. He moved to a small house in Maryland near the water. He bought a boat. He tried to fish, but the silence of retirement didn't suit him. He missed the game. He began consulting, doing background checks for private security firms, and occasionally giving lectures on Cold War tradecraft. He started writing a memoir, not for publication. The agency would never clear it. But for himself, he wanted to organize his life, to make sense of the shadow war he had fought for 40 years. In 2015, the past finally caught up with him. It didn't come with a bang. It came with an email. It was a notification from the CIA's declassification office. A large tranche of documents from the Year of the Spy era was being released to the public under the 25-year rule, delayed by 5 years for administrative backlog. Thorne had subscribed to these alerts years ago. He clicked the link. He scrolled through the index. There were thousands of pages, budgets, meeting minutes, assessments of Soviet grain production, and there, buried in a subfolder titled Vienna Unidentified Assets, was a photograph. Thorne froze. He clicked the image to enlarge it. It was grainy, black and white, taken with a telephoto lens through a rainy window. It showed a street in Vienna. 2 men were walking away from a beige Peugeot. One was tall, gray-haired. The other was stocky, clutching a satchel. It was them. But it wasn't Thorne's photo. He hadn't taken a picture. This photo was taken by someone else, someone who had been watching him. The caption under the photo read, Subjects, Viktor Volkov and Alexei Korjov. Operation Zenith. Date, 14 Nov 1985. Thorne stared at the screen. The names meant nothing to him, but the operation name, Zenith, sent a chill down his spine. Zenith was a myth, a rumored Soviet program that every Western intelligence agency had feared but never confirmed. He looked closer at the photo. In the corner of the frame, he could see his own profile in the driver's seat of the Peugeot. He hadn't just given a ride to 2 spies. He had driven them right through the middle of a surveillance operation that he didn't know existed, and the people watching weren't the CIA. The watermark on the photo was from the BFV, the West German Domestic Intelligence Service. Thorne picked up the phone. He had to make a call. He had to go back to Vienna. To understand the gravity of what Elias Thorne saw on his computer screen in 2015, we must step back into the geopolitical pressure cooker of 1985. While Thorne was driving his Peugeot through the rain, the CIA and the KGB were engaged in a silent, savage war of mole hunting. Aldrich Ames, a CIA counterintelligence officer, had begun selling secrets to the Soviets in 1985. Robert Hansen of the FBI was doing the same. The American intelligence network in Moscow was going dark. Agents were disappearing, being arrested, or executed. The CIA was blind. In Vienna, the city of spies, the atmosphere was toxic. The station chief, Holloway, was under immense pressure to find new sources. Every encounter, Every whisper was analyzed for potential leads, but the file Thorne had just opened revealed a layer of the game he had completely missed: Operation Zenith. Thorne spent the next week in a fever state. He used his old clearances, what was left of them, and his network of retired contacts to pull threads. He called a friend in the German BND, the successor to the West German services. He called a former archivist at the NSA. He pieced together the fragments of Operation Zenith. It wasn't a Soviet operation. It was a joint Western operation, British MI6 and West German BFV, targeting a specific KGB unit known as Directorate S. Directorate S was the elite of the elite. These were the illegals, officers who lived in the West under deep cover, with false names, false histories, and no official connection to the Soviet embassy. They were the ghosts. They were almost impossible to catch because they acted like normal citizens. The two men in Thorne's car, Viktor Volkov and Alexei Korzhov, were illegals. According to the declassified summary, Volkov had been living in Hamburg for 10 years as a machinery importer. Korzhov had been in London, posing as a freelance technical translator. They had converged on Vienna in November 1985 for a specific purpose. They were the extraction team. Their mission was to retrieve a package from a high-level source within the Austrian government, a source that had stolen the encryption keys for the new NATO communications system. This was the mechanics of the harvest. It wasn't about tractors. It was a code word. Harvest was the NATO system. Mechanics were the keys. The British and Germans had been tracking them. They had a surveillance team on Volkov in Hamburg and followed him to Vienna. They were waiting for the exchange. They wanted to catch them with the goods. But on the night of November 14th, the surveillance team lost them. The report was dry, bureaucratic, but damning. Target subjects lost in heavy precipitation near Stadtpark. Visual contact broken at 21:05 hours. Reacquired at 21:30 hours near Karlsplatz, but subjects were devoid of package. Thorne read the line again. Lost in heavy precipitation. That was him. He was the reason the surveillance team lost them. He had picked them up at 21:12. He had driven them out of the surveillance net. He had unwittingly acted as their getaway driver. And the second part of the sentence, reacquired, devoid of package. When Thorne dropped them off, they had the satchel. When the surveillance team found them again 20 minutes later, they didn't. They had dropped the package during that 20-minute window. Thorne closed his eyes, thinking back to the drop-off. He had let them out near the Hotel Imperial. They had walked into the alley, Bösendorfer Strasse. They hadn't gone to a hotel. They had gone to a dead drop. They had stashed the stolen encryption keys somewhere in those few blocks, cleaned themselves, and then allowed themselves to be seen again, empty-handed and innocent. The British and Germans never found the keys. The operation was considered a failure. The harvest keys were assumed lost, likely smuggled out later by a different courier. NATO had to spend billions changing the entire system, and it was all because a nice American diplomat stopped his car in the rain. The guilt hit Thorne like a physical blow. He hadn't just been a taxi driver. He had been an accessory to one of the most damaging intelligence failures of the decade. But then, a new thought occurred to him. A detective's thought. If they dropped the package in that 20-minute window, where did it go? The KGB usually retrieved dead drops immediately. But if the surveillance was heavy, if Volkov and Korzhov knew they were being watched, and they did remember the surveillance detection in the car, they might have cached it for a long hold. A hiding spot meant to sit undisturbed for months or years until the heat died down. But the heat never died down. The Soviet Union collapsed 4 years later. The network shattered. Volkov and Korzhov likely fled or were recalled. Was it possible? Was it even remotely possible that the mechanics of the harvest, the physical encryption keys, the tapes, the codes, were still sitting in a rusty ventilation shaft or a hollow brick in Vienna, waiting? Thorne looked at the calendar. It was November 2015. Exactly 30 years later. He booked a flight to Vienna. Vienna in 2015 was cleaner, brighter, and more expensive than the Vienna of 1985. The soot-stained facades of the buildings had been scrubbed to a pristine cream color. The rattling trams were now sleek, silent machines. The coffee was still excellent, but now it cost €5. Thorn checked into a small hotel in the First District. He didn't go to the embassy. He was a private citizen now, a tourist with a cane and a thick coat. He spent the first day just walking. He needed to recalibrate his internal map. The city had changed, but the bones were the same. The Ringstrasse still circled the heart of the city. The Opera House still stood guard. The Hotel Imperial was still there, grander than ever. On the second night, he waited for darkness. It wasn't raining, but the air was cold. He put on his coat and walked to the spot where he had dropped them off. He stood on the corner of Kartner Ring and Bösendorfer Strasse. He closed his eyes, listening to the traffic, trying to summon the ghosts of 1985. The car stopped here. They got out. They walked. There. He followed their path, into the side street. It was narrower than he remembered. On the left was the massive flank of the Hotel Imperial. On the right, a row of high-end offices and a music shop. He walked slowly, scanning the environment with the eyes of a case officer. Where would you hide a satchel? Not in a trash can. Too temporary. Not in a sewer grate. Too risky. It had to be a dead drop location that had been pre-scouted. A loose stone, a magnetic box behind a drain pipe, a hollow space in a wall. But Volkov and Korzhov were improvising. They were under surveillance. They needed to dump the package fast. Thorn walked the length of the block. He reached the end of the alley where it opened up near the Musikverein, the famous concert hall. He stopped. In 1985, this area was under construction. He remembered the scaffolding. He remembered the wooden walkways that pedestrians had to use. If there was construction, there were holes, foundations, wet concrete. No, the satchel would be destroyed. He turned back. He looked at the music shop, Bösendorfer pianos. In the window, a magnificent grand piano gleamed under the spotlights. Thorn stared at the shop. The building was old, ancient. He noticed a small wrought iron maintenance door near the ground, tucked between the shop's display window and the stonework of the next building. It was a coal chute, or an old delivery hatch, sealed up years ago. The iron was rusted. The padlock on it was ancient, caked in grime. But looking closely, Thorn saw something, a scratch mark on the stone above the hatch. A geometric shape, a triangle with a line through it. It looked like graffiti, but to a trained eye, it looked like a signal site, a mark left by an agent to indicate a drop had been made. The mark was faded, almost invisible, but it was there. Thorn's heart hammered against his ribs. It was impossible. It was a fantasy. But he had to know. He looked around. The street was empty. It was 11 p.m. He couldn't break into a coal chute in central Vienna. He would be arrested in minutes. He needed help. He needed local assets, but he didn't have any. He took a picture of the hatch with his smartphone. He took a picture of the scratch mark. He went back to his hotel and opened his laptop. He pulled up the file on Viktor Volkov. Where was he now? If the package was still there, only Volkov would know. Thorn dug deeper into the 2015 declassified dump. The file on Volkov ended in 1991. Subject returned to Moscow. Status, retired, retired. That meant he was alive. Thorn spent the next 48 hours doing something he hadn't done in 20 years. He hunted a man. He used open source intelligence, Russian social media, pension records, old KGB alumni newsletters. He found a Viktor Volkov listed as a board member for a logistical company in St. Petersburg. A photo from 2012 showed an old man, thin, with white hair, holding a glass of vodka at a banquet. It was him. The eyes were the same, the Finnish delegate. Thorn found an email address. It was a corporate address. He sat at his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keys. "What do you say to the enemy spy you helped escape 30 years ago?" He typed. Subject: The mechanics of the harvest body. Dear Mr. Volkov, November 14, 1985. Vienna. It was raining. I drove a beige Peugeot. You left something behind near the Imperial. I think it's still there. I am at the Café Central tomorrow at 10 a.m. I am the man who didn't know about the statue in Helsinki. E. Thorn. He hit send. It was a long shot. A message in a bottle thrown into the digital ocean. The next morning, Thorn sat at a marble table in the Café Central under the high vaulted ceiling. He ordered a melange and a slice of strudel. He waited. 10 a.m. came and went. 10:15 a.m., 10:30 a.m. Thorne sighed. It was foolish. The man was in St. Petersburg. He wasn't going to fly to Vienna on a whim. He paid his bill and stood up to leave. "Mr. Thorne?" The voice was raspy, dry as old paper. Thorne turned. Standing near the coat rack was a man. He was old, frail, leaning on a cane. He wore a heavy wool coat. It wasn't Viktor Volkov. It was the younger one. "Alexei." "Viktor died last year," Alexei said, his English still heavy, still rough. "But he told me about the driver, the American who was kind." Alexei limped forward. He didn't look like a threat anymore. He looked like a grandfather. "You wrote about the harvest," Alexei said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Why?" "Because I found the coal chute," Thorne said. Alexei's eyes widened. The granite face cracked. A look of genuine shock passed over him. "It is still there?" Alexei asked. "I think so." Alexei let out a short, barking laugh. 30 years. We thought the British found it. We thought they cleared it and just never said anything to embarrass us." "They lost you," Thorne said. "Because of me." "Yes," Alexei said. "Because of you." He looked at Thorne, and for the first time there was no hostility, just the shared weariness of two old soldiers who had outlived their war. "Sit down," Thorne said. "Let me buy you a coffee, and then let's go see what's in the bag."